Hello, friends. We're going to jump right into Flora and Ulysses, reminding us that our characters, okay, that we've met so far in the story, we have Flora, who's our main character, right? She's in the middle because she kind of drives the story and what's going on. And then we have Mrs. Tickham and Ulysses, who are connected to each other, and Mom and Ulysses. And Mom and Ulysses haven't really had an interaction with each other yet, so they're not connected. But we can still think of them as, both important parts of the story. Something that I want you to think about today is how is Flora's relationship with her mom? Okay. So, how do they interact with each other? How do they speak to each other? What kind of comes up between them? Okay. And then something else to think about, you just did a whole lot of work with point of view in a nonfiction article, right? So reading about different types of things. We all read the bee article together. You read it with me. And we talked about what the author's point of view was about bees. In fiction stories, there's also point of view, okay? And I want you to think about who's telling the story. That's really what point of view means in fiction. So is a narrator telling the story and kind of looking from the outside in, or is one of the characters telling the stories themselves? Some of the clues to help you decide that is that if a character is telling the story, they're going to use the words I, me, my, I'm, we, okay? And that means that they're telling their own story from their point of view. If a character is not telling the story and it's a narrator, and the narrator is kind of on the outside looking in, they'll use words like he, she. You'll hear descriptions of part of the stories, and then you'll hear characters talking to each other and interacting. Okay, so try and think about, is the story being told in first person? So is one of the characters, like is Flora telling her own story? Or is it third person? Is a narrator looking from the outside and telling the story of what's happening with the different people and the different characters throughout the book? Okay. All right. So here we have chapter 15, the electric chair. To say that the Buckman doorbell rang would be inaccurate. Something had happened to the bell. Its inner workings had become twisted, warped, confused, so that instead of emitting a pleasant ding or bong, the doorbell now sent an angry, window-shattering, you guessed the wrong answer on a game show kind of buzz through the Buckman house. To Flora, the doorbell sounded like the electric chair. Not that she'd ever heard an electric chair, but she had read about them, and that particular comic had not contained any advice other than that it would be best to avoid getting to a place in your life where you might face an electric chair and any noises it was making. Flora had found it to be vaguely threatening and not at all useful. That's your father, said Flora's mother. He rings that doorbell to make me feel guilty. The doorbell buzzed and crackled again. See, said her mother. Flora didn't see. How could a person ringing a doorbell make another person feel guilty? That was ridiculous. But then just about everything that Flora's mother said or wrote sounded faintly ridiculous to Flora. For example, on Feathered Wings of Joy, since when did joy have feathered wings? Don't just stand there, Florabelle. Go open the door. Let him in. He's your father. He's here to see you, not me. The electric chair knell of the doorknob sounded through the house again. For the love of Pete, said her mother. What's he doing leaning on that thing? Go let him in, would you? Flora walked slowly through the dining room and into the living room, and she shook her head in amazement. Upstairs in her room, there was a squirrel who could lift a vacuum cleaner over his head with one paw. Upstairs in her room, there was a squirrel who could type. Holy bagumba, thought Flora. Things are going to change around here. We're going to be vanquishing villains left and right. She smiled, a very large smile. The doorbell gave another outraged sizzle. Flora was still smiling when she unlocked the door and opened it wide. So why is Flora smiling so much? What's making her hopeful? Victims of extended hallucinations. It was not her father at the door. It was Tootie. Tootie Tickum, said Flora. Tootie stepped through the door and into the living room, and then she stopped. Her eyes widened. What in the world? She said. Flora didn't even bother turning around. She knew what Tootie was looking at. What do you think Tootie's looking at in their house? That's the little shepherdess, said Flora, the guardian of lost sheep and light, or something. She belongs to my mother. Right, said Tootie. She shook her head. Well, never mind about the lamp. She took a step closer to Flora. Where's the squirrel? She whispered. Upstairs, Flora whispered back. I've come to check and see if what I think happened yesterday actually happened, or if I'm the victim of extended hallucination. What does hallucination mean? So hallucination means maybe you're seeing things that you don't believe are actually there. Maybe you're seeing things that might seem strange, okay? So sometimes if someone was to say, well, I saw a ghost, someone might say, oh, you're hallucinating, meaning that you made that up. It wasn't actually there. You just are thinking you see things. So Mrs. Tickum wants to know, did she actually see a squirrel hold up a vacuum cleaner and do those things, or is she making things up in her brain and not really seeing what's there? Flora looked Tootie in the eye and she said, Ulysses can type. Who can type? Said Tootie. The squirrel. He's a superhero. Tootie said, for heaven's sake, what kind of superhero types? It was a good and also slightly disturbing point. How exactly was a typing squirrel going to fight villains and change the world? George, shouted Flora's mother. It's not Pop, Flora shouted back. It's Mrs. Tickum. There was a silence from the kitchen, and then Flora's mother came into the living room with a big, fake, adult smile plastered on her face. Mrs. Tickum, she said, what a lovely surprise. What can we do for you? Tootie smiled a big, fake, adult smile back. Oh, she said, I just came to pay Flora a visit. Who? Flora, said Tootie. Your daughter? Really? Said Flora's mother. You came to see Flora? I'll be right back, said Flora. She ran out of the living room and through the dining room. What a truly extraordinary lamp, she heard Tootie say. Oh, do you like it? Said Flora's mother. Ha, thought Flora. And then she was out of the dining room and into the kitchen. She ripped the paper out of the typewriter and looked down at the words. They were absolutely not a hallucination. Holy bagumba, said Flora. A loud scream echoed through the house. Flora took the paper and shoved it down the front of her pajamas and ran back into the living room. Why do you think she shoved it into her pajamas? Kind of seems like she's hiding it. Why does she want to hide it? Ulysses was sitting on top of Marianne, or rather he was trying to sit on top of Marianne. His feet were scrabbling to gain purchase on the little shepherdess's pink-flowered lampshade. He paused in his efforts and looked at Flora in an apologetic and hopeful way, and then he returned to wobbling back and forth. Oh my goodness, said Tootie. How did it get in here? Shouted Flora's mother. It just came flying down the stairs. Yes, said Tootie. She gave Flora a meaningful look. Flying! It absolutely scared the living daylights out of me and Mrs. Tickum. We screamed. We did, said Tootie. We screamed. There's just no end to this excitement. If that squirrel breaks my lamp, I don't know what I'll do. Marianne is very precious to me. Marianne? Said Tootie. I'll just get him off the lamp, okay, said Flora, and she put out a hand. Don't touch it, screamed her mother. It has a disease. So here's Ulysses right now, balancing on top of Marianne, the shepherdess. The doorbell, as if it were echoing Flora's mother's advice, buzzed its terrible warning buzz. Flora and her mother and Tootie all turned. A small voice called out. The voice said, Great Aunt Tootie? So who do you think's there? Great Aunt Tootie. Who's now coming into the story? Okay. I smell squirrel. There was a boy at the door. He was short and his hair was so blonde that it looked almost white. His eyes were hidden behind enormous dark glasses. In addition to terrible things can happen to you, the illuminated adventures of the amazing Incandesto regularly featured a second bonus comic entitled The Criminal Element is Among Us. The criminal element gave very specific pointers on how to never, ever be fooled by a criminal. And one of the oft-repeated dictums of the criminal element was that the best way to get to know a person was to look him or her directly in the eye. Flora tried to look the boy in the eye, but all she saw was a reflection of herself in his dark glasses. He looked short and uncertain, like an accordion in pajamas. An accordion in pajamas. So an accordion is a musical instrument that you play, and it makes really loud music, but it kind of pushes in and back out again. I'm trying to picture an accordion in pajamas. William, said Tootie, I told you to stay put. I heard screaming, said the boy. His voice was high and thin. I was concerned. I came as fast as I could. Unfortunately, on the way over here, I had a small but extremely violent encounter with a variety of a bush. And now I'm bleeding. I think I'm bleeding. I'm pretty sure I smell blood, but no one should be concerned. Please don't overreact. This, Tootie said, is my nephew. So why do you think he's saying that he's pretty sure he's bleeding, but he's not sure if he's bleeding, but he smells blood, so he could be bleeding, but he doesn't think anybody should be concerned? How would he not actually know if he was bleeding? Great, nephew, said the boy, and I hope I don't need stitches. Do you think I need stitches? His name is William, said Tootie. William Spiver, actually, said Tootie's nephew. I prefer to be called William Spiver. It distinguishes me from the multiplicity of Williams in the world. What does that mean, the multiplicity of Williams in the world? What math word do you hear in there? Multiplicity. And what does it mean? He smiled. It's a pleasure to meet you, whoever you are. I would shake your hand, but as I said, I think I'm bleeding. Also, I'm blind. You are not blind, said Tootie. I am suffering from a temporary blindness induced by trauma, said William Spiver. Temporary blindness induced by trauma. The words sent a chill down Flora's spine. Seemingly, there was no end to the things that could go wrong with human beings. Why hadn't Terrible Things Can Happen to You done an issue on temporary blindness induced by trauma? Or, for that matter, one on extended hallucinations? I am temporarily blind, said William Shriver again. How unfortunate, said Flora's mother. Here's William. So he keeps saying he's temporarily blind. Do you think he's really blind, or that he's kind of saying that? Tootie says he's not blind. Who do you believe? He's not blind, said Tootie, but as of this morning, he is staying with me for the summer. Imagine my surprise and excitement. I have nowhere else to go, Great Aunt Tootie, said William Spiver. You know what that? I am at the mercy of winds of fate. Oh, said Flora's mother. She clapped her hands. How wonderful. A little friend for Flora. I don't need a little friend, said Flora. Of course you do, said her mother. She turned to Tootie. Flora is very lonely. She spends far too much time reading comics. I've tried to break her of the habit, but I'm very busy with my novel writing, and she's alone a lot. I'm worried that it's made her strange. I'm not strange, said Flora. This seemed like a safe statement to make when someone as truly profoundly strange as William Spiver was standing beside her. I would be happy to be your friend, said William Spiver. Honored, he bowed. How lovely, said Flora's mother. Yes, said Flora, how lovely. The blind, said William Spiver, even the temporarily blind, have an excellent sense of smell. Oh, for heaven's sake, said Tootie, here we go. I have to tell you that I smell something out of the ordinary, something that's not usually smelled within the confines of the human domestic sphere. The human domestic sphere. So in other words, he's saying their house. Something that's not usually smelled within the confines of the human domestic sphere, said William Spiver. He cleared his throat. I smell squirrel. Squirrel? Confronted with the spectacle of William Spiver, they had forgotten about Ulysses. Flora and her mother and Tootie all turned and looked at Ulysses. He was still on top of Marianne. He had managed to balance himself on the small blue and green globe that was at the center of the lampshade. That squirrel, said Flora's mother. He's rabid, diseased. He has got to go. All right, so William says that he knows there's a squirrel in the house because he smells squirrel. Have any of you ever gotten close enough to a squirrel to smell it? Because I haven't, so I'm not really sure what a squirrel might smell like. But also I want to think about, why does Flora's mom think that Flora and William would be such great friends? What is making her think that? Okay. And then also what I said at the beginning, how do you think Flora's relationship with her mom is? Her mom said in front of a lot of people that she's strange. Flora seems to be short-tempered with her mom. Okay, so what do you think is going on with the two of them in that part of the story? All right, so we have a new character to add to our chart here. All right, so we're going to add William to our chart. And now who is William connected to? Who has he had interactions with in the story? All right, so we can think about that, who he's connected to. Okay, and I will see you soon for the next part.